And he has had many years of executive experience in the not-for-profit sector, all sorts of sectors, not just carers, but also homelessness, aged care, families and youth. He joined Carers SA in March 2014 as our Executive Manager of Community Services, and he was appointed as our CEO in April 2017. So I'm really looking forward to hearing David talk and sharing what we do at Carers SA with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. I'm just going to get, just bear with me for 2 seconds, I'll get this PowerPoint up. Make sure it's running. There we go. Now I'm going to try and walk and talk a little bit, so if you just bear with me, I want to make sure that this, if that is, that's okay? That's not, the other one's not interfering with it, so that's good, and I'll set my timer so I make sure I've got, I'm going okay. So firstly, thank you Sonia for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate it, and also thank you very much to you as Rotarians for having guest speakers and for allowing me to speak to you today. I think it's really important for in my job and in my sector to educate people about unpaid carers, and that's part of what I'll be doing for you today. I'd just like to quickly acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we meet on today and pay my respects to elders both past, present and emerging. So, as Sonia said, I'm here to speak to you about carers, and specifically in my role as CEO of Carers SA. But I also have been a carer, and as the title says of my talk, I will be a carer again at some stage. So I was a carer for a very short, acute period of time with my father before he passed, and I also have been a carer for my daughter at various times when she struggled with anxiety. So there's lots, what you'll find out, now hopefully after the talk today, that you'll understand that there's lots of different versions of a carer. But it is very true that if you are not a carer right now, or if you don't know someone who's a carer right now, you will shortly. And in fact, you will be a carer at some point in your life. But it's more than likely, after I chat today, that some of you will be going, oh, actually, that's me now. I'm actually a carer now, and you probably don't realise it. And that happens to a lot of people. It happened to me when I was a carer. I did not realise it until I sat in the interview for the job in 2014 to get the job with Carers SA. So I did not realise I was an unpaid carer. As Sonia said, some really brief history about me. I've been at the organisation for 9 years. I've been CEO for 7. I took over from the only CEO the organisation has ever had. So she was there for 24 years. So a little bit of some big shoes to fill when that happened. Carers SA, as an organisation, we've been around for 34 years. Which is a fantastic effort. Started with a very small group of people who realised that they were carers and they needed support from the community and from government. And so the organisation grew from a grassroots movement, is how we like to call it. So true community engagement, true community development, where something grew from a need within the community, which is a fantastic thing. And so now from that point in time, where we started with, I think there were 2 people in the office, we now are fortunate that we provide statewide services. We have anywhere fluctuating between 120 and 130 staff, and that we are funded by both state and federal government to support carers across the state. So that includes into the APY lands, it includes across into the west coast, all the way down to the south coast, southeast down the Limestone coast. So surprisingly, and when I tell people that we're between 120 and 130 people, people generally have that same reaction as you did. It's quite surprising to know that a sector that supports carers has so many people working for it. Now we just need to make sure that... There we go. So this slide here, I want you to, if you can see the screen, I'd just like you to read on the right-hand side in the white writing. What I want to explain to you about is what a carer is, how we define a carer, but there's a couple of things in here that are really important to point out to you, some of the words that we use. So when I say carer, I want to tell you what I'm not talking about. What I'm not talking about is a paid support worker. So you will see in aged care or disability or lots of other organisations that name their staff, their paid staff, carers, and we see it a lot. What I'm talking about, I want to tell you, I'm not talking about paid support workers. I'm talking about people who are doing a caring role and they are unpaid. Now, unpaid care is the other thing that I need to give you a definition about. Because unpaid care means that if you are doing something like and providing something for someone else, a family member or friend, if you are supporting them emotionally, if you are supporting them potentially with grocery shopping, if you are cooking for them, if you're preparing meals, if you are dispensing medication for them, if you are providing personal care, showering, toileting, a whole range of things in the personal care space, and if you're paying their bills and managing their money. So all of those things are incorporated into unpaid care. Some people do every single one of those things. Some people do only some of them. So I would assume, I would hope now what you're thinking and asking yourself is, am I doing any of those things for people that I know? And do I know people who are doing those tasks? So if you are a carer, so that is you're doing it unpaid and it's not part of a job, and you are providing those unpaid care activities to someone, and if that person has a disability, a mental illness, might have dementia, might have a long-term health condition, might be an illness that is terminal, might have an alcohol or drug-related issue, or there's someone who's frail-aged, then you are a carer. And they are the people that as an organisation we provide support to. So it's really, I guess the thing to point out about on the list on the left-hand side of the slide there is those descriptions of people that are being assisted, that sits within legislation both at a federal and state level. So there's a couple of points in there that don't, but mostly those are legislated by state and federal government, and so carers are recognised in a thing called, surprisingly, a Carer Recognition Act. So South Australia was the second state in the country to have a Carer Recognition Act. It was 2005. The federal government followed suit in 2010, and they're only just reviewing that now after 13 years. So carers, so what I'm talking about is actually recognised in legislation. It's actually some of those items on the left-hand side of people being cared for that are depicted there. So hopefully you've got a good idea about who and what a carer is and what they do. I hope some of you are realising that either, oh gee, I am a carer, I have been a carer, or I definitely know someone who's doing it. I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about some stats, just to give you a sense of how many carers are in South Australia, what they do, and then I'm going to talk to you a bit about how carers get support. So, in big writing, but in South Australia there's about 245,000 unpaid carers. The bottom number of 30,000 young carers, unfortunately that's an estimation because the stats and the surveys that government do don't go under 16. So we make an estimation of that. There's about 30,000 carers who are between the ages of 7 and 25. The youngest person I've ever met who's in a caring role, a serious caring role, was 7. It blew my socks off when I was speaking. We had a session sitting down with Jay Weatherall when he was Premier in his electorate, and he met young carers at a coffee shop. The youngest person there was 7. She was caring for her parent, one of her parents. So you'll often see young carers, which is a fascinating but heartbreaking thing to see, is that they are either helping to care for a brother or sister, one of their siblings, or they are caring for a parent. And so when you think about the impact, so we talk about impacts on caring, so there are lots of impacts, and we were talking at a table about social isolation. Carers, because the caring role can be so all-consuming, it can become very isolating. But when you think about young carers, it can be isolating from social groups, but it can also impact education, which is really significant. So one of the things, it's important to know that in South Australia, about 245,000 carers, 30,000 of those are young people, which is the definition up to 25. We do have a saying that we use all the time, that anyone, anytime can become a carer. So that can be sudden. So you can be unfortunate, someone can get sick, can have an illness, can have an accident, and all of a sudden one day, and we have one of our staff members who's written 2 books actually about his caring role, and he does all of our community engagement, but he became a carer on his honeymoon. It's a tragic story, but they are both, he and his wife, they've had kids, loving family, fantastic how they've managed to manage their life, but they were on their honeymoon. They were in a serious crash in the middle of the hills in India, I think. They love going to far, remote places. She has long-term brain injury and also physical injury as well, so he's in a wheelchair, motorised wheelchair. So things can happen quickly like that, or things can happen over time. And as you know, people get sick over time, they age and get frail and they need support. So that's what we always say, anyone, anytime can become a carer. And some of the interesting stats, across Australia, there's almost, we say 2.7 because 2.65 doesn't sound quite as good, million, but about 2.65, almost 2.65 million Australians are carers. So that's 1 in 9 people. Carers make up nearly about 11% of the population. So it's pretty significant. So when we think about how we advocate strongly for carers, when we talk to key decision makers across the country, we talk about how many carers sitting in your electorate, how many people are using your service. 7 out of 10 carers are female or are women. And that is a statistical fact. It's been like that for a long time. It's slightly changed over time, but that's been the case for a very long time. Across the country, so this is not in South Australia, but across the country, 235,000 carers are under the age of 25. So there's some significant supports that are in place for young carers across the country. And the last one, which we still use this figure, but it's too big to really have an impact because people look at it and it's hard to fathom. So every year, unpaid carers have an estimated number of hours that they commit or they do their role, 2.2 billion hours of care they provide every year, which is significant. Now, this doesn't quite word it correctly, but if we've done some work, the last time it was done, and that little small writing at the bottom there says 2020, so these numbers are as of 2020, so they would have increased. But if government or anybody had to replace unpaid carers with a paid workforce, $80 billion a year it would cost. So it's impossible to do. So when I talk to you about the importance of carers, that's an important number. That's an important number to remember. So the question we ask ourselves and we talk to key decision makers about all the time is, well, are carers important? The question that I just saw, the stat that I gave at the end just there is about it'll cost you $80 billion a year if carers don't do what they do. Well, yes, they are important, but what would happen if carers didn't care, if they weren't in their caring roles? So you can probably imagine the impact that you would see every night on the news just about, and through the election process it was all about health, it was all about ramping, it was about the health systems at Chocker's aged care system is struggling to cope and they're planning for the future. So what we say to decision makers and people when we talk to them is that carers are the safety net for the community. So if you think about a carer is in a caring role and life gets too busy, life gets too hard, the caring role is too stressful, and they stop caring, generally, what we do know is that carers for their caring role have a lower health, lower well-being, are more psychologically distressed and are more financially challenged than a person who's in a non-caring role. So I know people, and our ex-president has been a carer for 40 years for two people, her husband with PTSD and her son who had an undiagnosed mental illness for some time. But she's been doing it for 40 years. Now, if she stopped and gave up and it was too much, what happens then is those two people end up in the system. And that might be the health system, the aged care system, the mental health system. So that costs government a truckload of money to do. So you can imagine when we go in and say to the health minister and the human services minister, if you didn't have the 245,000 people doing what they do every year, your systems that you manage are overrun now and are struggling now. Imagine if carers weren't there. So that hasn't resulted, unfortunately, in the type of money that we would like to support carers. It's the obvious question. But what it does do is it does give the federal government and the state government impetus to provide some support, because the aim for us as an organisation is to maintain a carer's well-being enough so they can stay in their caring role. So they don't, in the fancy words, they don't relinquish their role and they don't get sick themselves, because as soon as they're more likely to get sick than than someone who's a non-caring role. So if they get sick and the person they're caring for is already unwell, you've got two people in the system. So our job as an organisation is to try and support the carers as best we can, not to increase their well-being, because sometimes that's incredibly difficult, but to maintain their well-being and maintain their health to a level that they can keep doing what they're doing to benefit the community. That's our role. So the answer to the question, obviously, is yes, carers are extremely important. I've got a real passion for it, developed a passion over 9 years about the sector, but it's very, very important, and our systems would be in real strife if carers didn't do what they do. I'm going to just run you, in the last 5 minutes, I'm just going to run you through the last 4 minutes, I'm just going to run you through the supports that are available for carers, and that's both funded from a state and a federal level. We're fortunate in the fact that we deliver these. Now, they might be a bit small for some people who are sitting a bit away from the screen, but I'm happy. I'll provide this to Sonia if anybody wants would like the presentation. They're more than happy to. So there's a thing called the Carer Gateway. Really quickly, it's a service funded by the federal government for unpaid carers. It's free to access. Does not matter if the person you're caring for has an NDIS package or has an aged care package or has a DVA card, gold card, does not matter. This is about the carer, it's not about the person who's being cared for. So this can be accessed no matter who you're caring for. We have a thing called carer support planning. It's essentially where we talk to the carer, work out what their needs are and look at an action plan to how we can support them. Tailored support packages is really a fancy way to say that a carer can have access to up to $5,000 a year and they can plan with our staff about how they would like to use that. If they need a break at some stage and they want to get someone to come into the house to provide respite and provide paid support work for the person they're caring for so they can have a break or do what they need to do, we can do that. But that's very flexible and it depends on what the carer needs. Counselling, it's an obvious one. Caring is a very emotional, stressful role, and it can be really overwhelming. And counselling can be anything from therapeutic counselling, and we've got some significantly qualified people on our staff to do that, or it can be problem solving. It can be as simple as problem solving. We have the peer support. So we were talking on the table about the importance of social connection. We're still trying to get the federal government around to provide the right type of peer support, because they had it totally wrong at the beginning of the program when it started 4 years ago. But we're getting there. That's about connecting carers with other carers. Caring role can be very isolating. You can lose contact with friends, you can lose contact with the community, and people don't understand. In particular, you will have friends that don't feel comfortable coming and talking to you as a carer because of what's happening in your family situation. So you sometimes lose that connection. So this is about regaining that connection. Coaching is a great one-to-one intensive. It's a terrible name. My president nearly had a heart attack when she heard what government were going to call it. It essentially means that there's one-to-one intensive support that you can get from a staff member, and the carer can direct what that need is. So if they come in and say, I want to access support for the NDIS, they can do that, and we can help them do that. Emergency respite care. The easiest way for me to describe this one is there have been numerous times over my 9 years where there's been a carer in the back of an ambulance ringing our number, our 1-800 number, saying, "I'm on my way to hospital. I've got someone at home who can't care for themselves. Can you get someone there to help them?" So it's emergency is anywhere between 48 to 72 hours. And we can put someone, we have a great support coordination team or service coordination team that gets people paid support work in to help people out, which is really, really full on. It can be quite stressful, and our team gets quite stressed by it, as do the carers. The last couple, so that's all federally funded. Federal and state governments hate to replicate what each other are doing. They don't like spending money on the same things that each other are doing. So we have negotiated with state government to complement those previous services I talked about with these two. Breaks for carers. One of the biggest things carers generally, most carers that we support can't afford. You might be able to put someone in the home to provide care, paid support work, but they can't afford to go anywhere. They can't organise a holiday. They don't have time or the brain space to do that. So we can provide and fund a break for a carer. It might be 2 hours, it might be a day, it might be overnight. That, for a carer who has to wake up 3 times a night for the person they're caring for, to actually have a solid night of sleep is amazing. The last one is young carer support. So the state government have focused in on intensive one-on-one supports for young carers, which we think is super important, especially to get those people through their education. Really, really important. So we're fortunate in South Australia. Government has invested a reasonable amount of money into us providing support, and we're not the only organisation that provides state-funded supports to carers, but we are the only organisation that provides the federally funded supports to carers. And lastly, if you ever want to contact us, we've got an email address, we've got our website, we've got our phone number, so you can provide referrals through the website, you can register on the website and we'll call you back. There's all that you can talk to us on the website, you can do everything that you need to do that every other organisation does. But what I would say to you is, if you are a carer, the last thing I'll say is, if you are a carer or you know a carer that is struggling, ask them how they're going, talk to them, and you might be able to say, "Have you heard of Carers SA?" Thank you very much.
All right, we've got, don't disappear, Dave, because we're going to get you to answer questions. We've got plenty of time for questions, so, and there's a roving microphone somewhere. Oh, Florian, you always ask a question.
Thanks for the presentation, David. I'm just trying to get a picture of how you're funded. So obviously state and federal, what percentage that finds of your operation, and any balance of that, how do you look after that? What do you do to finance the balance?
Yeah, look, it's one of the biggest challenges. In fact, we've got a strategic planning day on August 3 where our funding, or our diversification of our revenue stream, is our biggest concentration. So 100% of our funding is from government. So that puts us at risk already. 95, it used to be about, before state government reduced our funding this year, we used to be about 89-90% federally funded and 10% state. That's because of our reduction in our state funding. That's jumped to about 95-96% federally funded, and the rest is state funded. So total revenue, we're this financial year now. I've been saying this coming financial year for so many times with the board, but we're about 22 million. So for an organisation, it's a reasonable. We're a small, what we would call a small to medium enterprise, but we've grown from $6 million about 6 years ago to 22. Our biggest challenge as an organisation is the services that I talk to you about are great, but there are gaps in that. So some we've been able to fill, the carer breaks, federal government won't fund, state government do now. But there are lots of other things that carers need and want, particularly one-to-one navigation support to get them through the health system, the aged care system. That stuff isn't funded apart from our coaching service, which is only for 6 sessions. So my job will be, I've got no doubt that the board and our directors will say with my executive team, well, in August we'll say, right, we've got gaps. Carers are telling us there's a need. How are we going to fund it? So my job will be to try and find funds to do that and find ways to do it.
Okay. I give in.
Okay. So I've got a question about who the carers are. So I don't know, like probably educated guess is that the change in marriage and family structures, that like Australia, there are more people that are not married, the marriages there are have less kids, and you probably have basically more movement that people live away from their families. So it's like how does this change the demographics of who cares? Is it basically now pushing more towards outsourcing towards paid care, or is it effectively that they are basically people that have friends or not immediate family that kind of stepping in and kind of like taking on this role?
Look, it's a really good question. So not in my time at the organisation, but definitely over the 30 years, the change in the way families are structured has an impact. So it would be much easier, and I was talking to Tom about his children who went overseas, but it used to be very rarely now do you live with your parents and then you move around the corner and live with them. You're living away. So my parents, for example, are my mum and my stepdad are an hour away. When I cared for my dad, he was an hour away. Now, when I've got my own young kids, work, school, all that sort of stuff, it becomes a lot more difficult to care. So that's where the pressure you'll often see that be on one sibling. So if you're fortunate, in a family, you might have 2 or 3 siblings that can chip in and help. Sometimes I'll give a good example with my dad. His sister was interstate. He did the bulk of the caring, and so the load was on him. So it has the way families are structured, not so much the way the families are structured as in marriage and number of kids, but where family disperses to once the kids get older does make a difference. And so the pressure then often sits back on 1 or 2 key members, and that might be the partner of the person they're caring for, with not much support from the other family members. So there can be a couple of things that can be really isolating. The caring role itself can be isolating. That can be from your general friends or your community. But it can also be really isolating and fractious within a family, and I've seen that happen. So yeah, the demographic, probably more so about where family moves to, and moving away impacts the type of care. But it is important to note that caring comes in lots of different varieties. So some caring is 24/7 hands-on physical. So if your partner, so if my wife becomes ill or sick or frail, then I'm caring for her 24/7. It might be lifting, it might be showering, it might be a whole heap of stuff. But when I was caring for my dad, he had acute mental illness, and that wasn't physical, it was all emotional, and all stressful, and all that remote contact, and that's episodic, it's not constant. So everything is slightly different. So not only do the family dynamics and the geography of the family's location has an impact, the type of caring role you have or the person you're caring for has a big impact as well.
I have one of the things I picked up from your presentation was the strength of community and lived experience. 20 years ago, one of our boys had a spinal injury playing rugby, and it took about a year or 2 before we were one of the lucky ones. He came back, has 90% of his capacity back. But the strength that we got from those other parents in what was called paraquad was amazing. That helped us through that dark period while we lived through that. And it affects everybody in your family. It's not just the parents. So therefore I would encourage you to actually keep those connections between carers, because they will share their empathy and their support. just a comment.
No, you're spot on. What we find, and unfortunately, when government design systems and models like they have in this case, I don't want to be too disparaging, but it's often from Canberra. It's from a bubble. You talk about they don't understand what happens on the ground. So what was designed for the peer support module, which is social connection, is one of the biggest things that carers tell us is fantastic. That shared empathy, that shared understanding, because sometimes no one else in your life understands what you're doing, apart from someone who's also doing the same role. So we've pushed really hard to drive government away from the model that they had set up, which was very theoretical. If you can imagine you're a carer and you walked into a support group and you wanted connection, and we gave you a booklet and we ran you through 3 modules and then said, now you connect with everyone else. We knew it was not good and we told government, but it had to fail, unfortunately, and it had to fail some people before government would see the evidence and change it. But you're spot on, that social connection is vital, and that shared understanding. We can tell, as my staff and my team can tell carers the best places to go and how to navigate systems. But it's when they sit next to someone and say, oh, I'm trying to do this. I say, oh, well, have you tried to contact this person? Have you tried this workaround? That's the bit that works. And that's why social connection is really important between carers. And it's why, at our last count, and this was probably 8 to 12 months ago now, 78% of our staff were active carers. So we're actually actively in a caring role, which means that they understand far better what the people are going through that they're trying to support.
Dave, just a quick one.
Yes, Ken.
Across different cultures, do you find similarities or differences or common themes? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So across caring, the person they're caring for, so there's a base level of challenges that carers experience. Now, there's differences in the person you care for changes that, your community that you're in, where you come from, your culture and your beliefs. All of those change the way the caring role impacts. We specifically go into culturally and linguistically diverse communities and provide a whole level of different education and different support to those groups, because culturally it is different. So I've got a great team. Pardon me, and we've got a great team. One of our marketing and comms person is from the Italian community. She's in a caring role at the moment. She said, you don't talk about caring role. If you don't do it, you're in trouble. So that's just how it works. And so engaging with the Italian community is very different than it is engaging with a different community. Very different to engaging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, which the kinship connection there is so different. And the caring roles are so different. There's no word for carer in lots of communities. That doesn't exist. And so we make sure we go into, we're on Radio Italia, we're on Greek radio, we go into lots of different places to go and engage. And we do that more face-to-face with communities that don't traditionally recognise the term carer.
Any last bits? We've got 5 minutes. We've got time for another question.
Actually, I'm going to ask a question because I've got the microphone
too.
very quickly. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Looking at your figures, David, it's very obvious that not all the carers access your services. How do you spread the message out there with the people that don't know that you're there?
Yeah, it's the biggest challenge that we have to engaging people with our services. So that's why we always start our conversation is, what is a carer, who are they, what do they do? Because unless you understand what a carer is, and if you are one, if someone offers you a service, you're going to say, or a support, you're going to say, oh, that doesn't relate to me because I'm not a carer. We might think we know you are, but you might not recognise that. So our biggest referral point, or biggest way that we get people to access our services, is through old school community engagement. It is literally on the ground, talking to community organisations and organisations locally in regions. That is our biggest referral point. And we find that people access support. It's referrals are great from a third party. So you might refer a carer or a friend. You might say, oh, look, could you please contact them? Because that's possible to do. But it's far more likely that a carer will access services if it is them that contacts us, rather than an organisation or another individual or family or friend who refers us. So we do lots of traditional stuff. We do social media, we do marketing. We're on, if you're travelling around Adelaide at the moment, near any hospital, if you look at the bus stops, you will see a big colourful sign saying, I am a carer for my husband who has mental health challenges. There's about 6 or 7 people who've willingly provided their details and their photos and are in a marketing campaign for us. We're doing a big campaign through what we call the Central Adelaide Local Health Network, so at Royal Adelaide, QEH, around to their 17,000 staff to educate them about what a carer is, and they're actually giving little gift bags to carers in the wards when they see family members there. And we've done TV ads, we've done stuff on buses, so the traditional stuff. But the most effective is actually word of mouth and actually standing in front of people from organisations and telling them about what it is. That's the best way of doing it, which is, and interestingly, government don't fund that work. So we're fortunate we've been able to, because of COVID, we've been able to roll over some underspends, but we spend money on what we call our strategic engagement team, but they do that work, and government don't allow that in their budget. So we've got some work to do in the next couple of years if that disappears.
Thank you, David. I'm just wondering, I mean, I imagine aged care is where most of our carers are, but I might be wrong. What are the most needed areas that people are caring for? Have you seen a growth in the mental health side of things?
Look, since I've been in the last 9 years since I've been in the organisation, it's really quite varied. And I guess as the population ages, we'll see far more requirement in the frail age and ageing area. But we see lots of stuff around mental illness. We see lots of stuff around disability. We see frail aged. So there's a real mix. There's not. I call ourselves a generalist organisation. We engage we partner with organisations that specifically support people in mental health with mental illness because we know they're specialised in it. But we have to be generalised because you might say that 70% of people in caring roles are caring for someone who's frail or aged, but we won't get 70% of those people who are, of those 245,000 carers, to answer, Jill, a bit of your question as well at the same time. Of those 245,000 carers, we have actively on our books at the moment about 14,500. So we have to be prepared, and our staff have to be prepared to be generalists and to know everything, which is really difficult because they have to be across the health sector, mental health sector, disability, aged care, and they have to understand how carers and how people access those services. So it's complex and complicated, but it depends on, and we look at a sales funnel methodology where we go, there's a lot of people, 245,000 carers need a service. There's a percentage of them are aware of the service, and there's only a smaller percentage of that group that will act and actually go and contact us. So I'm sorry I can't give an exact figure, but it really does depend on those who get to a point, generally, because they're in crisis, that they need to act, and that can vary about where they're from or who they're caring for.
Well done. Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks for all the really insightful questions that added to the presentation. We have a small gift for you. This year is the 100-year anniversary of the Rotary Club of Adelaide. And we've got an amazing book that has been put together by Zeng Tan with a lot of help from other people as well. Excellent. So it's a little souvenir for you. And if members, could you please stand and thank in the usual way? Well done. Thank you. Good job. Excellent. Thank you.